Alright guys, welcome back to Conquering Commander. Today we're going to be talking about my Sharuum the Hegemon deck. For the complete deck list, go to puremtgo.com, look up my article series Conquering Commander, and you should see it lined up nice and neatly like this. The reason I made the Sharuum deck is because it's actually Sphinx week over on Pure MTGO. So I decided to put together a Sphinx deck using Sharuum, and I'm still in the process of putting it together, but you'll be able to see the whole deck list over there. When putting together a Sphinx themed deck list, I'm not going to say this is a straight up tribal Sphinx deck because it quickly became apparent when I was putting this together that most Sphinxes cost more than dragons. They just cost a ton of mana. They range from like 6 to 7 to even 8 mana, and there aren't too many that are cheap. So I just couldn't put every Sphinx possible into the deck. I had to sort of turn it into a control deck. For a little bit, I thought of just using Asperia Supreme Judge, but that removed black from the equation. And so I ended up going with Sharuum. You know, just looking at her, people expect like a combo-based commander a lot of times, or just a real brutal Esper control deck. You know, she kind of lends herself to a control deck, but because I was trying to push the creature aspect a little more, it's not as controlling as it could be. So there's like 12 or 13 Sphinxes in this deck, and also because of Sharuum's ability, I wanted a decent amount of artifacts in the deck as well. Well, you know, the artifacts in the deck aren't super powerful. There's a decent amount of artifact creatures in the deck. Most of them fly. So really, there's 3 different things going on in this deck. Sphinxes, artifact creatures, and flyers. And so let's just take a look at what we got here. It is basically an Esper control deck. It's not super controlling. It's not the most controlling deck you can make. But let's just take a look at some of our cards here. When we're talking about card draw, which seems important in an Esper deck, Windreader Sphinx actually worked well for what it did. I do have a minor token making ability in this deck, and if I get a couple tokens out with Windreader, I draw a ton of cards. Sphinx of Uthun, same thing, it's just pretty solid card. Asperia keeps you from getting attacked. Consecrated Sphinx, obviously awesome. Time Spiral, like you will sometimes have times where you just draw a ton of cards, and it's good to have Time Spiral to put all those back in your deck. Enigma Sphinx was just a goofy card I enjoyed. Tezzeret is another reason I really wanted to keep the artifact count high. There are actually only about like 25 or 26 artifacts in the deck, but Tezzeret Agent of Bolus seemed like it would be cool enough to run. It's interesting that this Tezzeret actually got more hate than the mono blue Tezzeret. People didn't like this guy for some reason. So more card draw in Jace, Phyrexian Arena, Rhystic Study, Scroll Rack, and Sphinx's Revelation, which seems necessary in a Sphinx deck. Rhystic Study kind of went with a very minor sort of taxing theme in the deck. You'll see a few more cards like that in the deck, and that just basically slows people down so that you have more time to get your Sphinx army on the go. As for flyers, we've got Sharding Sphinx, which is, you know, a good way to make a decent amount of little tokens. Does require multiple combat steps. Magus of the Moat, Bitter Blossom, another nice defensive card, and Gravitational Shift, which turns out to be probably one of the top cards in the deck. This deck had great difficulty really just closing out games, and being able to pump your flyers really helped a lot. So this was a card that I tutored for a decent amount. The destruction is, interestingly, there's not a ton of destruction. There's Steel Hellkite, Wrath of God, Revoke Existence, Swords to Plowshares, Path to Exile, Bajuka Bog gets rid of graveyards, Strip Mine, and Aethersworn Adjudicator, which is cool because it is an artifact creature and it does fly. You can use it to destroy some stuff and get in for a little bit of damage as well. But this was a little bit of an issue with the deck, is that you don't always have answers. There aren't a ton of a ton of real board wipes. I mean, the only board wipe on the deck is Wrath of God, and that's it. So, if there was one thing, well, maybe two, there's a couple things I might change, but I would probably try and maybe put Damnation or Austere Command in this deck as well. Mana help was really important to me because, again, most Sphinxes cost a ton of mana. So I've got everything from Tezzeret, the Seeker, and I've got each of the 3 different artifact lands in this deck as well. Solemn Simulacrum, Land Tax, Warden of Evos Isle. Most of your dudes fly, so reducing their casting cost is nice. Pilgrim's Eye, Coalition Relic, Orzhov Signet. I've got each of the Signets in this deck. Grim Monolith, Dimir Signet, Azoria Signet, Weathered Wayfarer, Tithe, Soul Ring, Mana Vault, Mana Crypt, Mishra's Workshop, because a lot of these creatures and stuff are artifacts, ended up working out really well for me. It is a little sad sometimes that you can't use it to activate abilities and stuff, but Workshop worked really well. And then Grand Arbiter, because a lot of your cards actually have both white and blue in their casting cost. So he's actually able to help out a bunch with mana and tax your opponents as well. So he worked really well in this deck. Alright, now I do have a decent amount of tutors: Vampiric Tutor, Enlightened Tutor, Imperial Seal, Demonic Tutor, and Sphinx Summoner. All are solid tutors. Recursion comes in the form of Sanctum Gargoyle, another flying artifact creature, as well as Junk Diver. These are kind of like your backups to Sharuum. We've also got Academy Ruins and Trading Post. So if you need to return stuff to your hand, usually Trading Post worked well for that. Defense comes in the form of Baleful Strix, which can draw you a card as well. Tide Hollow Strix, and flying Death Touch creatures are just good in general. Counterspell and Mana Drain, and then Ghostly Prison and Propaganda. Again, a few more taxing effects. This deck really worked at trying to direct people to attack the other way. And then after that, we have sort of our catch-all group. Phyrexian Metamorph is an artifact creature. Argent Sphinx is probably the only cheap playable Sphinx in the deck. It wasn't that great. I did usually have Metalcraft, so I was able to use its ability, but yeah, it just wasn't that great. I just wanted a cheap Sphinx that I could cast. Indomitable Archangel helps protect all your dudes. Mirror Works I never drew, but seemed like it'd be pretty cool, especially with a lot of the artifact creatures in the deck. Chancellor of the Spires is another way to grab answers out of opponents' graveyards. Sphinx of the Steel Wind is just a huge beater. Medomai I never actually connected with in this deck, but he seems like he'd be pretty good. Vault of the Archangel, and then Magister Sphinx. Okay, so Magister Sphinx. When I first put the deck together, I did not have Magister Sphinx in the deck, and the main reason was the card annoys the crap out of me. And I thought, okay, you know what? I don't need to put the Magister Sphinx in there. I can get around it. I don't need him, and I'll be fine. Well, it turns out that like I mentioned before, this deck had a horrible time closing games out. Games just lasted forever when I was playing this deck, because it's not a combo deck, and it doesn't just overwhelm with creature superiority. It just takes a long time. There's no extra turn spells in the deck other than Metamai. So I decided to go ahead and put Magister in, because he's a Sphinx, he flies, he's an artifact creature, he fits in with the theme of the deck very well. What it did do was, yes, it did make games faster, but then it turned into a game whenever the Magister showed up, it turned into, oh, how do I get it out of his graveyard? How do we copy it? How do we use it? So it's sort of like the the Esper version of Sylvan Primordial, or even Primeval Titan. Like everybody wants it, so everybody like fights over it. And then on top of that, if people aren't fighting over it, they see that you played it, and then automatically you become targeted because you run it. So it really depends on how you want to play the deck. If you don't want to use it, you don't have to. There's plenty of other, well, I can't say plenty, but there are at least a few other Sphinx cards that I didn't use that are probably worth considering. I don't like any of these guys. Asperia, the Inscrutable could be used. Sphinx Ambassador is probably the one that I would most likely replace it with, because this is just a fun, goofy card that can do a lot. The other one is probably Sphinx of Magosi, because card draw is nice. And then Sphinx Sovereign, it just cost a ton of mana. So those are the three that I was considering that didn't quite make the deck list. Now let's just take a look at the stats for the deck here. If it comes up. So the average mana cost is 3.48, which is on the high end for me. I did get a decent amount of cheap stuff, but almost all 6, 7, 8 is all, Sphinxes, pretty much. It is a heavy blue deck. Like I said, the deck isn't super competitive or anything like that. The interesting thing about the deck is that, this is by average converted mana cost, is that a lot of times I didn't have artifacts in my graveyard to pull out. So, that's just something to consider, I guess. The deck's more of a fun deck. I mean, it does have some cards that make people go, "What? What are you doing here?" But when people briberied me or whatever, they'd look and they'd be like, "Oh, it's a Sphinx Tribal deck." I'm like, "Well, it's not quite Sphinx Tribal." So is it going to be able to hang with the best Esper decks out there? No. Is it going to be able to hang with a finely tuned Sharuum the Hegemon deck? No. Is it a fun deck for controlling people that want something just a little bit out of their comfort zone? Yes. Is it good for long games? Yes, unless you search up Magister Sphinx real quick. So that's kind of what we're looking at here. There's a decent amount of artifact ramp, which helps you get into these higher casting cost stuff. I mean, this is all Sphinxes up here. All these 7 drops right here. And then an 8 drop. And then almost all these guys. So, this is Sphinx Week. This is my contribution. I hope you guys enjoy it and watch the games. Alright, thanks.